Welcome to today's webinar. Today we're going to talk about the future of freight, and the focus is on rail. My name is Laurie Goodall. I'm part of the Thames Valley Chamber of Commerce. I'm the one of the international trade and customs advisors, and I'm also the global membership account manager. Today's webinar is a group initiative through the Chamber Trade Academy, which we will run through it and talk about shortly. During the webinar, please feel free to ask questions through our Q&A facility, and we'll try and endeavour to try and answer all your questions at the end of the webinar. The webinar is being recorded today. Once we've recorded the webinar, obviously we will then obviously speak to your chamber and make sure the recording's distributed, so it's available for you. We can just move the slide. We'll just go to if you just move on again before we go to the agenda. So just about oh, we've missed it again. Just move to So just about the Chamber Trade Academy itself. If you just move to the next slide, Paul. So what is the Chambers Trade Academy? So it's an initiative of selected chambers of commerce across the UK to provide free, short virtual sessions providing informative and educational content regarding exporting and importing. We cover from the basics of trading to customs processes and the latest regulations and tips to grow globally. Combined represent more than 15,000 businesses of all sizes and sectors across the UK. You just move this slide again. So back to the other one. So what our services are, our international trade support. So we cover, we support traders of all sizes and sectors and provide services for every stage of your internationalization journey. We can cover many things, from international trade events, import and export customs training courses, letters of credit preparation, certification, and we get regular questions on post-Brexit information and support. So there's quite a varied number of services and trade support out there through the Chamber Trade Academy. So on to our today's topic, which is talking about rail freight. We're very, very lucky to have Paul Bathgate from RailX join us today. Paul has developed a great understanding for his digital communication information on systems. He's had varied roles in many industries, including the aerospace industry. Recently, he's held positions within the UK rail sector, and Paul's been able to create business model aimed at attracting new to rail freight customers. So there's a lot of opportunity. It's quite a strong subject at the moment. So we're very much looking forward to what Paul's going to say today. So without any ado, we'll leave you to it, Paul.
Laurie, thank you very much for the introduction, and thanks for the opportunity to talk to the membership out there. And hopefully I can do the subject of rail freight the justice that Laurie's just set out. A little bit in terms of the background for RailX and rail freight. So RailX is spun out of an Innovate UK project in 2019. And as Laurie's already indicated, the first four subjects highlighted here, I'll try and keep as generic as possible and talk about the rail freight industry, and then just focus a little bit on RailX and how it could help the chamber membership to gain better access to rail freight. So I will cover off all those points, but not necessarily in the order that they're identified. And just to provide some level of orientation for everybody, I'm looking to focus on the movement of shipping containers there is approximately 13 million TEUs, that's 24 equivalent units, or in plain English, about 6 million container imports and exports into the UK every year. And it is predominantly the movement of shipping containers on rail freight, which is seeing the biggest growth. And so I want to focus on that. And essentially, it represents the backbone of trade between the UK and the rest of the world. So it kind of plays into the space that the Chamber's got an interest in. Now, in terms of those shipping containers, there are a number of ports in the UK where they arrive and depart, but the prominent ones, the deep sea ports, are in the south. They are typically Felixstowe, Southampton, and then quickly growing London Gateway, which is where Kelly was yesterday, for those who follow her on LinkedIn. And predominantly, most of the rail freight services in the UK operate between those ports and inland rail terminals throughout the UK, using the same infrastructure that we travel on when we're moving on a passenger service. Typically, there's about 100 intermodal rail freight services operating per day, and they are operated through 4 freight operating companies, which is Freightliner, GB Rail Freight, DB Cargo, and DRS. It is only really the first 3 of these that provide intermodal services that we can easily access. I'll focus on those. The network itself is, as probably most of you are aware, is operated by Network Rail. So it is a monopolistic infrastructure with only 3 freight operators. The whole industry is quite monopolistic and recognized as such. And that does create challenges when trying to access rail freight. So of those 6 million containers, it still surprises me that 90% of those containers, when they arrive into the UK, are moved to a distribution centre or a customer's premises on road. That's approximately, for my math is not that good, about 5.5 million road movements, which creates the congestion that we're all too familiar with in our road network. It's subject to the rising fuel costs. So even though the price of a barrel of oil, I think, is quite low at the moment, $70, it's not reflected in what we pay at the pumps. And generally, fuel prices are only going one way, right? Driver shortages has been well discussed in the media. It is not changing. It's not something that will be addressed. There will continue to be a driver shortage for many years to come. I don't think it'll ever be fixed. But fundamentally, that volume of freight movements on road results in a significant carbon footprint for the UK, something we all have to be conscious about and concerned about. And the transport carbon footprint for the UK represents about 20% of the UK's carbon budget. So we all collectively and individually have a responsibility to think about how we can make an impact on reducing that carbon. Fundamentally, when we look at HGVs and heavy good movements, road haulage is not sustainable, not in the short term, not in the medium term, and probably not even in the long term. So whilst there are low carbon technologies out there which have been adopted in the automotive sector, and some of us are driving those type of vehicles, when you apply those technologies to a HGV with a 40-ton load, it is severely restricted in terms of the distance, the journeys that lorries can make. So the place that this low carbon technology has on road is for the short haul, what we call the first mile and the final mile, which I'll talk a little bit about. Rail freight is sustainable, does offer a sustainable alternative to road, but fundamentally it is underutilized. And that's where really I wanted to focus a little bit in the next few minutes. So of those 100 services per day, because of this underutilization, which is circa 25%, it means that any one day there are about 20 trains running around the UK network effectively empty, right? And that represents a lost opportunity of £80 million per annum. And that's what RailX looks to address. So if we can fill up those empty trains, then we can secure lower cost access to existing rail freight services. And really that's part of this discussion is how do we explore and exploit that? Much as you would do today, if you wanted to book a cheap hotel room, you can buy a room online at much below the retail value. So there's a synergy there. So whilst rail freight is sustainable, it also offers, not in every case, but in many cases, lower cost and improved reliability and surprisingly greater flexibility. And I don't mean flexibility in terms of, as my colleague would say, there's no steering wheel on the front of a train. So it doesn't necessarily take your goods to the door. There's always a final mile element. But if you think about, and those who are involved with moving freight services, typically we are experiencing 40% of vessel arrivals are delayed or late. And if you're involved with road, that means you've got to reschedule, rebook road haulage. They've got to then go through the VBS, the vehicle booking systems at the relevant ports. It becomes nauseous and complicated. So one of the advantages that rail freight offers is the ability to naturally roll over, if the ship's late, naturally roll over a booking onto the next rail service. And that's often the same day. There's many services operating per day, or the next day as necessary. So there's an element within rail which is not well understood. It's that flexibility, which takes a lot of pain out of rescheduling. But fundamentally, rail is significantly more sustainable. This slide says 76%. We validated that number through work that Kelly, who will talk shortly, has been doing with RailX. And if we're talking about electrified services, which do exist for freight, then obviously that's 100% reduction in CO2 over a typical road journey. Great. So what's the problem? Why are not more of us using rail freight? And that's the point of this chat, right? Why we're not using rail freight. There's many answers to this, but the key one is the rail freight industry is slow to respond. And typically, if I go back just 10 years, there was in excess of 40 million tons of coal being moved around the UK rail freight network. Clearly, that's not the case today. There's lots of steel being moved. That is not the case today. There is a fair amount of aggregates. So the likes of tarmac will move significant volume on rail freight. And we also see large corporates like Tesco's, for example, who've sponsored their own services. They're starting to make really good use of rail freight. But the industry itself has not yet transformed and has not responded to what is a growing market. The intermodal market is in growth, but most of that growth is being taken up by road. In terms of the size of the market, and I'm only focusing here on imports and exports of those intermodal containers, it's about 3 billion. So there's 3 billion in terms of revenue, in terms of the haulage effort associated with moving those containers. 10% on rail equates to roughly £300 million on rail. And what we've recognized is there's significant value that's locked within the relevant supply chains. And it's only by integrating across the supply chain that we can start to unlock that value. I'll talk a little bit about that in RailX, but it's the integration of movement of goods on vessels, on rail, on road, the storage, the warehousing, customs and distribution. By joining up that supply chain, there is significant value. I've only focused here on the value of the inbound logistics, if you like. And the only way we can unlock that value is through some form of digital transformation. And that is starting to happen. But the rail freight industry is probably one of the last industries to embrace digital technologies. It's coming. The timing is also of interest. So talking to the membership out there, if you're looking to, in some ways, differentiate your business to your customers, one way is to explore is to explore rail. And by exploring rail, it offers an alternative, an option to your clients in terms of the way you move their goods. And significantly, more importantly, is starting to the carbon benefit is starting to be recognized within the industry, not just from the larger businesses, but I think everyone's waking up to that. It also addresses this long-term shortage of HGV drivers and the rising fuel costs that I talked about. And of course, the impact of Brexit, which again, many members will be familiar with, and the new operating models that the UK is rolling out, still yet to be fully played out. And the potential demand for rail far exceeds the capacity within rail. So one of the benefits we're looking at in terms of rail freight is trying to understand where that demand will come from. And so if we can see where the demand is coming from, then we can inform and influence the freight operating companies to put on new trains and new services and secure new rolling stock to meet the demands within the marketplace. So I'm going to just hand over to Kelly. So the point that I tried to make on the previous slide is we naturally, and the industry naturally, considers road as the primary mechanism for moving intermodal containers, in fact, all goods. Kelly's initiated a campaign, and I'm going to hand over to Kelly, but the name of the campaign is Rail First, right? So whenever you think about moving goods, the point is think rail first. Kelly, I'll let you talk to this slide.
Totally taken all the lines. Thank you, Paul. So Rail First is very much dependent on industry-wide collaboration. As Paul has very much highlighted, there is a huge increase in growth in terms of road activity, and that meaning that obviously the ongoing carbon emissions is increasing throughout the UK, and the Department of Transport has very ambitiously released information in terms of targets of an increase in rail freight by 75% towards 2050, which means ongoing we are trying to create more opportunities to put freight on rail. The interesting part, and listeners hopefully are logistics providers and end users, so global brands looking to improve their sustainability and their carbon footprint, then the important part to remember with rail is that it's an immediate change. So looking at all of your road activity today and creating those data sets, you'll recognise opportunities to move to rail. And by doing that, tomorrow you'll be benefiting from a reduction of 76% within your footprint. So anyone that is led by sustainability, that should be a huge tick in terms of creating opportunities today and ongoing for those. Now, Rail First is very much, as Paul said, about just putting rail into a conversation. If you are a logistics provider, you want your end user to be informed with that information. So understanding what road looks like and whether it's commercially viable to then move to rail. And if you're consistently having that communication, that conversation, because at times the logistics industry is very difficult to navigate and commercially tough, but moving into 2025, hopefully rail plays a more significant role, especially with those brands that are sustainably led. So Rail First is set on our website in terms of RailX, so you can gain more information there. You can see from the slide, we've got some great big names getting involved because they really believe that moving forward in terms of logistics, then that modal change to rail is going to play a significant role in how we drive this forward. And obviously then the RailX team and myself can answer any questions in regards to sustainability and how to move that forward in a way that makes sense for the business. But it's a huge opportunity from a sustainability piece. And that's pretty much it, because I know we're moving quite quickly in terms of these topics today. So back over to you, Paul.
Thanks, Kelly. I didn't really introduce you properly. So Kelly is one of the thought leaders in terms of how the UK will address sustainability. So she provides a lot of mentoring to some significant key stakeholders within the logistics industry. So by all means, reach out to Kelly if you need more information. I'm not going to do a live demo. I'm going to hand over to Lindsay in a short while, who provided a live demonstration. So if you like, I've described the rail freight industry and the challenge of trying to get access to it. And RailX is one mechanism to do that. But if you follow the link on the QR here, it will take you to the site where you can access RailX, but I'll introduce that shortly. In essence, what we've recognized is because of the difficulty, specifically for SMEs, to try and get access to rail freight, because most of the rail freight in the UK is sponsored by either shipping companies or large corporates that you will have heard of. It means that the smaller players just simply can't get access, and yet it's the smaller players who represent about 70 or 80% of the UK freight movements, right? So it's everybody on this call and the membership in the chambers. has a significant role to play in accessing and moving rail freight. So RailX is a software as a service platform, but critically, it's not just about rail, it's about delivering a service. So it has to include the final mile, which is invariably by road, not always, sometimes by tugs. So for those of you who book tickets for yourselves using the train line, think train line, but only for freight, right? RailX fills existing train services and is predominantly marketing and accessing and providing services for new to rail customers, because obviously those who are already on rail don't need RailX, right? They've already got access. And as I've said, it integrates rail and road into a managed service. And Lindsay's going to talk to RailX to you about RailX in a short while. But it's that managed service element which I think is key here, that we can take a lot of the pain away whenever there's a disruption on a supply chain, and there is always disruptions in supply chains. The RailX software and the team behind it will help manage any of those disruptions. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Lindsay, I'm going to hand over to you just to give a brief introduction in terms of how easy it is to access RailX.
Okay, good morning, everybody. Can you see the screen?
Not yet, Lindsay.
Okay. Are we on now?
That's it.
Okay, good to go. So I'm logging into the internet with the website for the app, which is www.railx.com. From here, we do have a test account that I'm going to log in and walk you through the view that will initially greet you. So this is the home dashboard. On here, you would see any quotes you may compose, the recent jobs that you have going, and then we have a cumulative, this is the instant carbon saving that this test account has created through the jobs that it's input in the system. You will view your impact further down the page, but first of all, I'm going to go to the quotes page. Here, you will see the quotes listed that you've already inputted in. You can edit these. However, we're going to create a quote today. I'm going to move one container, a 20-foot. I'm going to move it from Felixstowe. I'd like to go to Doncaster. We're going to have a look at the rail-only element of it, and as simple as that, we're going to get a quote. With this quote price, you will also see that you get an instant feedback of the instant carbon saving that you could achieve by booking this rail service. If you wanted to then have a look at how much that would be by adding in a final mile as well, we'll untick this. It's going to recalculate and give you a price that would involve the rail service and then also the final mile to your destination. If we want to go further with this job, we look at that price and the saving and something we want to push forward, we will proceed with the booking, and this is where it will ask for a little bit further information from you. Just tie down an exact price now. So the day of arrival is requested. It arrived on the 9th. On Billy, and I'd like to go to the wildlife park. So this is an exact price now that we're going to calculate, because initially you might just want to see what an approximate price would be for different routes and to see whether that's viable for yourself. So because I've put in the address, this is the actual price. So this is your return price. All the services are included, any lifts, anything that's associated with collection from the port, delivery to your customer, and then return to the port itself. This is where you would then book in the job and put in more details, which then makes the quote a live quote, and it's then processed as a job. So I'm going to go to the job screen where we can see in the system we've got some great jobs in here. I'm going to go to this one that's in progress so that I can actually see the view of how this job is progressing. So once you've actually completed a quote and you push the job through that's being processed, you will see a list of all your containers within that job. You will see here, this is the PIN. If it's going to Southampton or to London Gateway, you get a PIN number. If it's to Felixstowe, you would put the badge number in there. So that would be FGR or FLR. The rail reference, this is put in by the FOC when a rail is confirmed. So this is your reference. Delivery date, this is the date that you can edit. So going to the view of this particular container, you can at any point reschedule this for your final mile delivery, obviously within reason. You would have to do a little bit more intervention if you want it rescheduling on the day. You will see the milestones being hit, so you can see the vessels arrived. You would see when the rail has hit and left the port. You will see when it's arrived. You will see when it's being delivered. You'll see all those milestones there. You can also, at the tab at the top, have a look at your booking details, confirm those, and you will see a list of updates that's occurred within your job. Obviously, yours would be more accurate to the proper live job that's going on the system. The details here will tell you a summary of the job as a whole, as opposed to just container by container, and the history here is the history of the job as a whole. So your view is per container within the actual container view, as opposed to this view as a job as a whole. We've then got the carbon impact, so you will be able to see the tally of how your company has progressed with using rail over road. And you can also see this broken down per customer that you may have as well. That's been influenced by Kelly. Just to give you a better breakdown of how you can report that back to your customers. And obviously Kelly would be able to assist with even better breakdowns.
Thanks, Lindsay. If you could stop sharing, Lindsay, what I'll do, we'll move to the Q&A session.
How do we do that? Oh. I'm really sure how to stop sharing.
There you
There we
go.
go, thank you.
And I think that should throw up the last couple of slides.
Lovely.
So, Laurie, if you're happy, that concludes the presentation.
No, thank you very much, Paul, and the rest of the team. Thank you. That was very informative, and there's some, like I say, there's some very useful statistics in there. You know, I specifically sort of, you know, found the unutilization of freight quite interesting. You know, there's 20 trains, you know, bombing around there, sort of, you know, with nothing on them. So yeah, thank you very much for that. We do have a couple of questions. Bear with me, I'm just going to
while you're looking for those questions, Laurie, just aligned to rail, I just looking at some DFT figures yesterday in a government report, and roads even worse in terms of its utilization. So there's nearly 40% of HGVs that are on the road are empty, and there's nearly 500,000 HGVs on the road. So at any one time, there's nigh on 200,000 HGV movements which are empty. So there's a huge opportunity for us all in the industry to make better utilization of existing resources, not just rail but road as well. Definitely.
So yeah, I've got a couple of questions, Paul. You may or may not have already answered these, but we'll run through them anyway.
Sure.
So the first one is how connected is the existing UK rail infrastructure for nationwide rail delivery services and who are the key rail carriers to approach for UK? I've also got a remark on the bottom saying wide rail freight bookings, please. So I'm assuming obviously those are options for wide rail as well.
Yeah, so in terms of answering the question about the infrastructure, it is Network Rail's infrastructure. So in theory, a rail freight train can move wherever a passenger service can go in theory, but it's restricted by gauge. So depending on the size of the load, and we're typically talking about shipping containers, which if we include 9'6" containers, then the map I showed earlier highlights the main route. So predominantly north-south, so all the way up to Scotland, but not much further than Glasgow, although services do run up to Inverness, and they emanate from the main seaports, which does include Liverpool. There's potential for new intermodal terminals coming online from Humber ports in the years ahead, but so there is some restrictions in terms of gauge, but yeah, pretty much the rail services, 100 of them, and the 3 freight operators which run those services are GB Rail Freight, Freightliner, and DB Cargo.
Brilliant. Thanks for that. Second question, and you probably covered this quite in depth, but it gives you an opportunity to run through it very quickly again. How does rail transport cost compared to road transport?
Yes, good question. Really good question. I can answer that. And so for some clients, and the clients who were using RailX, it obviously works. The price works. Now, and by that, some clients can get a better price using rail services than they do on road. And it would depend on ultimately what swings it is the distance, the final mile, as we call it, from the inland terminal to the actual distribution center. That has a significant impact. And there are some customers out there who are happy to pay a premium. So what we find is perhaps a B Corp type company who are really carbon conscious would bake in the additional cost if there's an additional cost of rail freight. Whereas some of the SMEs are very cost conscious and would not do that. But we're also finding with some SMEs, because they don't have the buying power, the leverage, that the price they pay on road, actually we can offer a better price point than they get on road today. And so we've got about 50 customers trading on RailX, and I would argue that all of them are happy with the pricing that they get.
Super. Ellis, you've got a question for us. Do you see the creation of Great British Rail as a positive for the rail freight sector? Another good question, I think.
Yeah, I'm not completely au fait with the GBRTT, what the future role is, but what it does is it provides another forum for conversations and for strategy setting. So Network Rail is obviously responsible for the infrastructure. I'm not quite sure on what GBRTT's role will be going forward. I'm hoping it will be for good, and certainly there's a lot of focus on rail freight and growing rail freight in line with the figures that Kelly shared, which are the DFT growth targets of 50% increase by 2050.
Super. We have got another question that may or may not sort of you know, we've bought a small clothing business last year in addition with our main businesses we import from China with long delays. I think a lot of businesses are looking at some of the transport from China as a way, as you know, and some of the delays. I'm not sure if rail is an option or is an improved option for international movements from China. Is that something you guys are involved with?
So the dominant mode of moving goods from China, India, and elsewhere is as we said, intermodal containers, and then the main shipping routes into those key ports. That's the main volume into the UK comes by that route. There is the Silk Route rail route, which is across Europe, but relatively small volumes. And the big challenge that we find with that, even if it gets as far as France and Fréthun in France, you can't get the train through the tunnel easily. So there's not a lot of international freight movement between the UK and Europe through the tunnel. Very, very limited. There's a couple of services a week. So hence, I think for the foreseeable future, most of the trade will come via shipping and then be moved on to rail and road.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you for that. We've got one more last question, it looks like. How do you feel the input of new locomotives class 93 and 99 will impact on the industry? It's quite train specific, that.
Yeah, it's very spotter-esque. I'm sure that person wears an anorak in their spare time. So I think what they're talking about here, essentially the migration, the movement towards lower carbon locomotives, i.e. electrical locomotives. And there are some on the network. What they tend to attract is that because of the price point of electricity through the network, it tends to attract a fuel surcharge. So there is a higher price for moving goods on electrified services. But ultimately that is the future. That's certainly all the majority of passenger services are going. The challenge that rail freight has is that the intermodal terminals themselves, because of the way that containers are lifted on and off trains, don't play nicely with overhead power lines. So there's some challenges there, but I'm not technically, and I've steered away from that side. I can't offer any further insight, I'm afraid.
But like I say, I think you've been able to answer quite a lot of questions today and provide a lot of valuable information. And it's obvious that I think rail freight is definitely growing and definitely a topic to be discussed about more as we move into more sustainable targets. Any more questions before we finish? No, it looks like. I can just pop on to the next slide, Paul. Were you there?
Yeah, well, I'll just finish off. We're involved with a project called Transit, which is a major UK project looking at how the UK will address its sustainability targets. And it's been led out of Heriot-Watt University, but involves, I think, in total about 8 universities and something like 60 partners. What appealed to me when we engaged with this project is that they're coming up with Plan A, and the quote from the Professor Phil Greening, who runs this project, there is no Plan B. So as Kelly points out, by moving goods from road to rail, it makes an immediate impact on your carbon footprint. It's not like planting a tree and waiting 10 or 20 years. It's an immediate impact. But if we don't collectively do something, the world will not be a very nice place in the next 5 to 10 years. That's not a good note to leave on.
It's quite a strong, strong realization. But yeah, no, thank you for that. And like I say, that's definitely something that we can all learn from. Brilliant. No, excellent. And I say once again, thank you very much for providing that information. Just a quick reminder for the next Chamber Trade Academy webinar is on the 19th of September. Speak to your chamber about booking onto that. So the 19th of September, we've got contracting with your EU customers, what to look out for and what you need to know. So again, that'll be hopefully another very valuable, informative session. Apart from that, I will say again, thank you very much for those who attended. Thank you, Paul, Lindsay, Kelly. This webinar, again, just a reminder, this webinar we recorded. We'll distribute it to your chamber you registered with. And it'll be a great reference tool, I believe, as well. So yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Laurie.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.